Is Chris Murphy. I have the honor of representing Connecticut in the United States Senate, and I'm so pleased to be here today with the Giffords organization as well as March for Our Lives and our media partner MSNBC as we bring onto the stage 10 Democratic candidates for president who are going to share with us their bold plans to try to change the trajectory of gun violence in this nation. I have been a part of the modern anti-gun violence movement since the tragedy in my state when 26 and 7-year-olds lost their lives in Sandy Hook, and it is amazing to me to see the growth of the anti-gun violence movement. We started with a defeat on the floor of the Senate in 2013 when we lost a background checks bill that 90% of Americans support. Today, the anti-gun violence movement is stronger than the NRA. The gun lobby is hemorrhaging members and resources. We are growing in membership and political strength and our ability to impact and influence elections. I've been at the center of discussions with the White House and with Senate Republicans over the course of the last month about a background checks deal that could get Republican and Democratic support. I spent about 40 minutes on the phone with the President of the United States 2 weeks ago. The ground is shifting underneath the Republican Party and the White House. They know that they can no longer stand in the way of anti-gun violence legislation, and we may be able to get a bipartisan deal in the near future. As far as I'm concerned, Congress should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Though I support the impeachment inquiry of the President in the House, I'm ready to negotiate with this White House and with Senate Republicans a background checks deal that will save lives. I'm really excited to hear from the presidential candidates today. I think it's amazing that presidential candidates understand on the Democratic side that they can't get elected either in a primary or in a general election without a strong position on gun violence, and that is frankly a sea change from just 4 years ago, where Democrats weren't sure whether this issue was a political winner for them. Now we know that swing voters are demanding strong plans on anti-gun violence measures. Turnout depends on your ability to motivate young people, motivate communities of color, and one of the best ways to do that is show that you're serious on the issue of gun violence. With that, I'd be happy to take
Senator Murphy.
Yep.
Joe Biden released his gun control plan today. He doesn't support mandatory buybacks for assault-style weapons. Do you think that there's a litmus test for certain Democrats running in order to get your support on endorsement down the line?
I think every single candidate running has put on the table a bold, aggressive plan to combat gun violence. And so I really think that the fact that we have different ideas shows the strength of our movement. I think the most important thing to do is to pass a universal background checks bill and then to move on to some of these dangerous military-style weapons that don't belong in civilian hands. After that, different candidates have different ideas about where to go next, but I think that every candidate on stage is going to be supporting taking assault weapons off the street, supporting taking these high-capacity magazines off the street, and supporting universal background checks. And to me, what unites these candidates is much more important and significant than what divides them.
Do you support mandatory buybacks?
I have not taken a sort of detailed look at Beto's proposal. I have not proposed that during my time in the Senate. So I'm interested to take a look at some of those proposals, but I have not proposed nor endorsed any of those proposals as of yet.
Senator.
On the issue of universal background checks, many gun rights advocates say that the enforcement aspect of it is troubling because they say that in order for it to be truly effective, that there needs to be a registry of some kind so that law enforcement has something to look back at to see if that gun was purchased through a background check. And obviously they're not in support of a registry because then they say it can lead to confiscation. What would you say to that?
Well, law enforcement is able to trace gun sales today without a registry. Right now, guns are traced back through the manufacturer. The problem is when a gun is sold through the secondary market without a background check, you lose the ability to be able to trace that gun. So the importance of applying background checks to private sales and to gun show sales is first and foremost to make sure that we don't sell guns to criminals and people who are seriously mentally ill, but also to make sure that we can trace back crime guns more effectively. You don't need a online registry in order to do that. And in fact, mentioned to me, a bill that I supported in 2013, increased the penalties on anyone that was going to try to create a national registry of guns. And I would imagine, in order to get Republican support for a background checks bill this year or next year, you're going to also have to create some assurances that there's not going to be a national registry.
Senator.
If Democrats win the presidency next fall, do you see a viable path to getting Mitch McConnell to put bills like universal background checks and assault weapon ban on the floor, or do you think Democrats need to win the Senate for it to be meaningful?
Listen, I think we need to win the Senate in order to guarantee passage of the universal background checks bill. Mitch McConnell has had the ability to lead and try to find a compromise on background checks, and he's been completely unwilling to do so. He outsources the whole problem to the White House. So I think it'll be very difficult to get a universal background checks bill done. Maybe impossible if Democrats don't win the United States Senate. And so we've got to make it clear all across the country that if you're a voter that supports universal background checks, you cannot be sending Republicans back to the United States Senate. Now, Republicans have a chance between now and 2020 to prove to voters that they do not stand simply for obstructing an anti-gun violence agenda. And so I'm going to encourage my Republican colleagues to get a background checks bill done so that they don't have to take this issue and their obstinance standing in the way of background checks to the 2020 election.
Your thoughts on Senator Sanders' situation? I know you're aware of it.
Yeah, I don't know any more details than have been released. I'm pulling for Bernie. Nobody's tougher. Nobody has more energy than he does. I assume he wants to get well and back out on the campaign trail as quickly as possible, and we're all pulling for him.
Getting
No
bipartisan
reaction to the World War
legislation.
II era, fatal World War II plane crash in Connecticut.
I'm receiving details as we speak. My heart goes out to all those that were affected. It seems as if there were at least several fatalities. I'm being updated on a regular basis this morning, and we're ready to deploy federal resources if the airport and the families affected need them.
Getting bipartisan legislation is obviously vital for this, but what are your recommendations for finding common ground between constituents?
Well, constituents have already made up their mind on background checks. Background checks are only controversial in Washington, D.C. There's nothing out there in the American political conversation today that enjoys 90% of public support like background checks does. Apple pie and grandma aren't as popular as background checks are with American voters. And so there's this mythology that these topics are really controversial in the American public. They are not. More people now than ever support getting rid of these high capacity magazines and these dangerous assault weapons. So I think we've got to convince Washington that the public has made up their mind on this, and increasingly voters are going to prioritize anti-gun violence measures and candidates' positions on anti-gun violence measures when they go to the polls.
Thanks.
All right.
One
One
more
more?
question.
Yep.
So, research generally shows that after mass shooting events, the American public might shift their attitudes on guns, but that it will recede over time unless you're someone that has, directly experienced a mass shooting or it's happened in your community. So, how do you continue? We know right now this is like a secondary or third place issue for people. So for people who haven't experienced gun violence in their community, how do you get it elevated to be on par with, healthcare or the economy or the top issue that they're voting on?
Well, I don't know. I guess I would draw issue with the premise of the question. In 2018, for voters that chose Democrats to represent them in the House of Representatives or the United States Senate, healthcare was the number one issue, and guns was the number two issue. Immigration was the number two. The economy was number two. Guns was the number two issue. So I think that voters, regardless of whether they've been personally affected by gun violence, have made it pretty clear that this is a priority issue for them. And I think part of the reason is that you can't hide from this epidemic, even if you haven't been personally affected. I remember 2 years ago when my kindergartner came home to me and explained to me the active shooter drill that he had just gone through in his classroom, where he had been packed into a kindergarten classroom bathroom with 25 other kids, shoulder to shoulder, and told to remain quiet, so to practice as to what to do if a dangerous person came into their school. Every single parent is hearing these stories of their kids coming home, having gone through these active shooter drills. And every single one of these parents recognizes that no child should have to fear for their life when they go to school. These parents are now advocating for change in Congress. High school students and college students who don't want to have to fear for their life are advocating for change. And so I think that this is a matter of public consciousness throughout the country, and I think the polls generally bear that out. So, all right, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Yep.